I go to school in a big city that's one of the least safe cities in the US. I chose this school specifically for nursing, and definitely not for the location. I live in a row house, I guess that's what we call it, off campus with 4 other girls. Cheaper and nicer than dorms. Or so we thought. I guess in the end you get what you pay for. We are all girls and sophomores in college. As you would guess, we go out and drink, come back, do things we don't remember. We had just started our rent in August. 3 floors plus a basement, which was padlocked by the owners. Understandable. We would definitely have had parties down there to avoid immediate cleanup. Beside that though, the house was pretty great. Amazing location to the school and to work as well. I'm a CNA who works odd hours. It was not expensive and was in pretty good condition too. I had never lived with that many people before, just one roommate. So where I was living before, we definitely knew whenever one of us had misplaced or changed anything. Eventually, in this new place, I started to notice my snacks were either half gone or would be completely missing. I was starting to get really annoyed, but in a house of that many people, it's too much work to try and figure out who ate it specifically, so I just tried to get over it. Slowly, as girls do, we started making comments about someone eating our food, but passive-aggressively, like young college-age girls. We all just let it go though, because who wants the entire house to get into a big fight? At the time, I worked until about 11 in the NICU. I got home at about 11:30, mostly on weeknights. I started to take notice of pans left out or snack wrappers lying around. I thought it was odd because none of my roommates had done that before, but I just thought maybe they drank a bottle of wine and then went to bed. Maybe they just forgot being drunk. Again though, my roommates all started making their own comments. This time, we started to ask because it was getting really annoying with all of our food being gone and things being left lying around. I knew it had to be one of them, but who wants to admit they ate someone else's snacks in college? Snacks are a high commodity after all. We chalked it up to the girl who always smoked and ate her own weight in food. She swore up and down it was not her though. This went on for about 2 months. It started to get more obvious that someone was clearly stealing from us. Definitely the girl that always smokes. I see her eat her whole snack pantry in one night. Well, I wish it was her. One night at work, I was about to get off, but a situation happened and I didn't end up leaving until about 12:30 instead. I took the bus home. I carry pepper spray, a taser, and a pocket knife, so don't worry. I got home and just wanted to collapse. I wanted to sneak into bed ASAP. I walked into the front door. The stairs were directly in front of me. I could see down the side into the kitchen. I walked in and saw someone there, but I was way too tired to say hi, thinking it would end in a 30-minute conversation about nothing, so I walked straight upstairs. When I got to the second floor though, I noticed that all of my roommates' doors were closed, which always meant they were either in their room for the night or fast asleep. I started to get a weird feeling, something that made everything click. They were all asleep, right? I texted our house group chat, asking if anyone was in the kitchen. I felt stupid for even asking this question. 2 responded no, and said the other 2 had been asleep for a while. I knew it wasn't any of my roommates down there at that moment. I dialed 911. But I didn't press call yet. I crept into my roommate's room across the hall. Thankfully, or perhaps not thankfully for her, she didn't have her door locked. I whispered, telling her I thought someone was in the house downstairs. She gave me the widest eyes ever and looked like she was about to burst into tears. She didn't suspect anything like I had, but for reference, this was a very bad area. There was a shooting in the house 2 doors down only weeks earlier by an armed intruder. She mouthed to make the call. The whole time, we were dead silent. We couldn't hear anything at all. I was starting to think maybe I'd just seen things after such a long day at work and was regretting that I'd dialed, thinking I was going to look like an idiot when they showed up, and I was just overtired and daydreaming. Still though, we explained to the officers what's going on, and they say they'll send someone ASAP. And that actually did mean right away, since this was a big and dangerous city. The police showed up very fast. I didn't even want to go downstairs to greet them, but the operator confirmed it was them, so I did. The whole time I could swear the operator could hear my heart beating out of my chest. The police come in and start looking around. I'm thinking to myself, oh God, I must look so dumb. They ask if there are any other floors. We tell them technically the basement, but it's always padlocked, so not really, no. They check the basement just in case. And yeah, they were right. A man had been living in the padlocked basement. The lock had been pulled off the hinges and was just kind of propped there against the wall. We'd never looked down there though. We rarely went out back since it was locked. The guy had taken a comforter from one of my roommates out of the hall closet, a mattress from God knows where, and clothes too. He was the one moving and eating all our stuff. He would come out in the middle of the night and do it. He had started getting more comfortable lately. I don't know if he was drugged out and forgot to clean his tracks or if he didn't really care anymore. My roommates and I had pretty consistent schedules during the week, probably making him think that any time after 12 was good to come out. We never slept with our individual doors locked, and that's what freaks me out the most. He had access to any one of us at any moment, and we had no idea. When he was getting arrested, I was the only one to go down and look. I don't know why I did. I wish I didn't. I took a picture in the process of him being arrested to show to my roommates, who were all too afraid to go down and meet him. For some questions about all the stuff he had down there. The clothes, some were unexplainable, but the nice button-down shirts he had were from two of my roommates' boyfriends that they had complained about mysteriously losing. The basement was also used as extra storage for the owners long ago, so that's why there was a bunch of random things in there. Not everyone has to believe me, but it did happen to me, and it was very scary. In 2014, I moved to England from Canada to gain work and travel experience, and also to find myself. I ended up living in Essex with 3 other roommates. They were all women a bit older than I was. I was 24 at the time. Megan was 31, Cherry was 34, and Cassie was 38. Megan was from New York, Cherry from New Jersey, and Cassie from Poland. All 4 of us shared this 3-story flat. The back of our home was the living room and kitchen. The back wall was complete glass that looked out into the garden. The garden was completely fenced in. The house had an interesting dynamic to say the least. Tons of stories from that time in my life. I adored all of my roommates, except for Cherry. After living with Cherry for 7 months, I was completely over her antics. One day I come home from work. I lock the door, make myself something to eat, and go up to bed. I brought some work home with me, so I'm in my nightie with all these papers around me and my headphones on jamming out. I had my headphones on because Cherry was out to dinner with work friends. That meant booze, and then soon after that, a tantrum that would surely come. I didn't want to have to listen to her crazy scream crying the whole night. I was working away completely focused until I felt something. I look up to see a man standing over me. I didn't register it right away. I passively say, "Cherry's room is on the 2nd floor, you know," and continued to work. Cherry regularly brought strange men home. He didn't leave. Again, "Cherry's room is downstairs, you..." Then he interrupts. "I'm not here for Cherry." A cold chill iced my veins. My fight or flight immediately kicked in. I started surveying the situation. I look him up and down. He has a bottle of Prosecco in one hand and a knife in the other. He's about 5'10". Wild, muddy brown hair and black eyes. He has this light blue polo shirt on, and one side of his collar was popped up, a distinct Manchester accent as well. Once I focused in, I realized his eyes were black because his pupils were completely dilated. Shit, I was in trouble. I needed an escape plan right now. Unfortunately, this man was standing in between me and my bedroom door. I needed to get downstairs, but I needed for him to think it was his idea, so I decided to play along. Just at that exact moment, he uses his knife to pop the cork. I said, "Oh no, let's clean that up. I prefer to drink out of a proper flute anyways." He nodded, replying, "Yeah, you're a proper classy bird. Let's go." I try to act as naturally as possible. I try not to show that I'm shaking all over, and try to gain control over my breathing. We take the long journey down the main floor of my flat, all 3 floors. He has the back of my nightie bunched up in one hand, and I could feel the point of his knife graze my back with his other. I was trying to playfully speak with him as we walked down the stairs. I couldn't tell you what I was saying. I was most likely just rambling. I couldn't hear anything over the beat of my heart in my own ears. We get to the bottom of the stairs. There's a hallway to my left that leads to the front door. On my right, which is much closer to us, the kitchen and the living room. We make our way into the kitchen. I point to the cabinets that had the wine glasses. He said he knew where they were and started toward them. I now had the kitchen table in between us. It was time to run. I burst into a full sprint down the hallway toward the door. My hands fumble over the locks, shaking and sweating. I swing the door open and see 2 men walking across the street. They must have been walking home from the train, as there was a big train station right in front of our home. I call out to them urgently for help, and suddenly I'm flung onto the ground. Little pebbles piercing my skin send sharp pains where they jab in. The intruder pushed me out of the way to run and escape. One of the men began chasing after the intruder, while the other urged me to go inside while he surveyed my home and called the police. I locked all the doors and called the police myself as well. While I was on the phone with dispatch, I maniacally run around the house to double-check all the windows and doors. Suddenly, I hear a loud bang on my door. I inform the dispatch of the banging, and she informs me the police weren't there yet. I thought it might be one of the gentlemen who had stopped to help me. I go look out the eye hole though, and I see it's him, the intruder. He came back for me. He's banging on my door, screaming that I had his glasses and that he was not yet done with me. I freak out. The dispatcher attempts to calm me down, but I'm losing my ever-loving mind. She then said, "They're pulling into your street now. You should hear the sirens." I did, thank God. The intruder blasted off. One of the officers even had to jump out of the passenger side while the car was still moving and chase after him. The second officer comes into my home, interviews me and the 2 gentlemen, collects evidence and takes photos. After some time of him being there, Cherry comes home and freaks out. Once the situation was explained to her, she said, "Oh my God, that could have been me." Yeah, thanks Cherry, it's all about you. The next morning, I was called in to identify a man they had in custody. I pointed him out. I go into a little room and the officer pulls out an evidence bag. He asked me if the items were mine. They were. There were underwear and photos taken from my home as well. The officer then informed me that apparently this intruder had been stalking me for some time now. He estimated at least 3 months. He had made a nest outside our home on top of a hill that overlooked into our living room and kitchen. He was a known sex offender and drug dealer. He told me how lucky I was to get out practically unharmed. Others had not been so lucky with this guy. To the man who stalked me and broke into my home, let's not meet again. However, I would like to run into those 2 gentlemen that helped me. Every day, I'm very thankful for them. This occurred in 2017 and is 100% true. Due to a multitude of factors, including a recent death of a close friend, I was unbearably depressed at this time in my life. For that reason, my family flew across the country to visit me in LA where I live. We thought it would be nice to visit Catalina Island. When we arrived, it became apparent to us that this was the off-season. It was late November, the weather was extremely cold, and as a result, the island was nearly empty, besides locals and a few straggling tourists such as ourselves. Our very first priority was to ditch our luggage so we could go explore the island, so we immediately checked into our motel, though that word hardly does the place justice. I call it a motel because all the doors to the rooms exited to the outside, but in actuality, our room was one of the 20 to 30 quaint guest house-looking buildings arranged in sort of a horseshoe shape around a walkway, with rooms on either side of the path. The entrance to the motel was essentially one of the points of the horseshoe. If you walked dead straight, you'd reach the room we were given, essentially on the corner before you have to go right to go further into the horseshoe. So, from our room, one path led back to the street, the other further into the secluded maze of various rooms. Stay with me here. After a day of exploring and having just finished dinner, it was time for the cold, dark walk back to the room. Catalina Island is a decent distance from the mainland, and let me just say, it gets dark. Perhaps similarly dark was my headspace after the dinner conversation took a left-hand turn and my overwhelming depression got the better of me. I pulled my black hoodie tighter over my freezing ears and walked ahead of my parents to the hotel room, telling them I just really needed to go to sleep. I did immediately as well. Depression sometimes makes that quite easy. I was already losing consciousness as they entered after me, drifting off without so much as a good night. Then I woke up to my mom saying my name urgently, a harsh whisper. The room had 2 beds, my parents' bed closer to the door and mine further into the room. My mom's voice cut through the silence again. She sounded very concerned for me. I didn't blame her considering my mental state at the time. Groggily, I rolled over. "What?" I asked. As my eyes adjusted to the dim moonlight coming in through the curtains, I saw her turn to face me. She was surprised to see me in my bed. Her eyes got wide. If I'm in my bed, then who was she talking to? We both looked back to where she was previously looking to see a hooded figure in black standing over their bed. Now, I know this is a specific place for scary stories, and you're listening to this knowing a creepy thing is about to happen, but understand how horrifically startling it is to be on an island in the middle of the ocean and wake up to see a hooded stranger looming over you. This moment seemed to last forever. Life isn't like the movies, though, where characters unleash a blood-curdling scream. Sometimes, the only thing that comes out when you're scared is something panicked and guttural. My mom's words became low and severe as she said my dad's name in a dire voice I'd never heard her use before. Then, the hooded figure did something so bizarre and unsettling. It didn't advance towards us, but instead crouched in the corner where it stood. The way it crouched was so absolutely unexpected, even in regards to this already unexpected situation, that it terrified me. It was so animalistic. I knew 2 things, though. The hooded figure had been standing over us watching us sleep, and it was not acting in any sort of way I could comprehend. As opposed to the infinite moment of this figure standing over us mere seconds ago, though, the series of events that unfolded when my hulking ex-military dad finally woke up happened in an instant. Suddenly, we were out the door, not knowing which way the intruder had fled. My mom was screaming, "Get him! Get him!" My dad was running down one path of the horseshoe further into the hotel, shouting through sheer adrenaline, "I'm gonna fucking kill you!" I ran down the other path toward the street. When I got there, not a sign of the intruder. But it became suspiciously quiet behind me. I ran back to the room to find my dad quietly walking back, his head hung low. He got really close to me, and I heard him say, "It's a fucking kid." Explanation: some young teen, tall and lanky as I am in my 20s, wearing all black including a black hoodie, went into the wrong room. Our room on accident. The one time my parents just so happened to forget to lock the door. My mom woke up when he entered, and seeing a tall person in a black hoodie thought he was me, assumingly leaving the room in a depressive episode. When the hooded figure crouched, that was him realizing his mistake and panicking. He was scared of us. As I got back to the room, my mom walked out and hugged this kid, who was now bawling his eyes out. I would be too if a massive ex-soldier was sprinting after me with murder in his eyes. So, to the now traumatized kid from Catalina Island, I look forward to reading your Let's Not Meet of this same event from your perspective. First, let me set up some background to make the flow of the story a bit smoother. This happened almost 19 years ago. I was nearly 13 years old and was being raised by my grandparents. We lived in a little tourist town in Florida. They had problems with their 2 daughters as adults, my mother being the older of the 2, and they wanted to do everything they could to make sure I didn't turn out the same way. A bit of a do-over, if you will. Needless to say, they were very strict. My aunt was having a good period. She had all of her stuff together. We were all very close. My aunt understood what it was like to be raised under a glass dome, metaphorically speaking. They raised her too, after all. So, being as she was my only aunt, she made sure that the time we spent together was always super cool and fun. I would stay over Saturday nights. We would go out and hang out at the pier, and she would let me hang out with my middle school boyfriend, who would always find ways to get to wherever I was. My grandparents had no idea of any of these activities, of course. I was just spending some quality time with my aunt and giving them a break. It was nice that I had a younger female figure since my mom wasn't around. One night when we were out having fun, my aunt met this guy and they really hit it off. He was very nice and introduced himself to me. He went by JR, and at first he was a kind and charming talker. They exchanged numbers after hanging out for a while. Then we went home and went to bed. They ended up going out a bit more, and my aunt ended up really liking JR. He took her to his home, introduced her to his father, and showed her around his land. He lived out in the woods in the middle of nowhere. I had lived in this town for 30 years. And still to this day, I couldn't pinpoint to you where he lived. I only went there once. He was teaching my aunt how to shoot a gun. I remember her shoulder rocking back with the impact of the shot and it surprising her. He had these weird flamenco dancing clothes in his closet. It was all seemingly harmless. I mean, everyone has their own quirks after all. About 10 days, maybe 2 weeks later, we were again at the pier out by the payphones talking about what to do that night and what to get for dinner. JR and my aunt were in their late 20s or early 30s, and as much as she loved me, I imagine there were times when I did get in the way. Well, anyway, we were at the pier and he was talking about how he has these painkillers. He offered me one. I declined, of course, and told him I had a high tolerance to pain anyway and didn't really need that stuff. He then, with a huge smile, asks me if he can see for himself, assuring me he won't really hurt me as he's just trying to have fun. He grabs my arm behind my back and twists until I hear a loud pop. I start to cry. He laughs and says, "Oh, sweetheart, I was only playing. You said you had a high tolerance. I guess I was stronger than I thought I was being. I'm sorry. No need to ruin the good time we're all having." I go into the private pier office, which my granddad managed, bursting into tears. My aunt came in and let me know that she thought it was fucked up too, and that she talked to him about it. She goes back outside and he asks her what she's up to that night. She tells him that she isn't sure if I'm staying over, because of what just happened. I was whining about going home. I was pissed she hadn't decked him right there for hurting me so much. He tells her she should meet him under, let's call it the Sunset Bridge at 2 a.m. on the other side of town. He says the stars are real beautiful there, and you can listen and hear all the fish and wildlife. He tells her he would love to see it with her, and they could dance there under the moon. We were all from a fishing family and lived in a fishing town, so fish activities under the bridge at late times weren't necessarily something that threw up a red flag. Plus, if it's dark and late, there won't be other people there hogging up all the fish. She told him maybe, and we left together. I decided to spend the night after all, later sneaking in only if she would pick up my boyfriend Charlie, playing heavily on the guilt points. She calls him when she gets home, and says she can come, but she'll have me with her. He groans. "Fine, alright, I guess she can come. Maybe she'll get tired and just sleep in the car or something." About an hour after she called JR the first time, I ask her about Charlie and she agrees. She sits down with me and hugs me and touches my face lovingly, apologizing for what happened with my arm. My aunt was an amazing woman, and I love her very much. She then calls him again and tells him not to worry. Now she's picking up Charlie, so I'll have my own entertainment and they can have their alone time. He immediately goes into a flying rage, sputtering and cussing about how it's too complicated now. He just wanted an intimate meeting with her, not a damn family reunion. He went on and on about how he didn't want to have to babysit a 13-year-old and her 14-year-old boyfriend. He then hung up after calling her a crazy bitch. She bewilderingly hung up the phone and told me what happened. Instead of all that nonsense, we go about our night with pizza rolls and PlayStation, and things end up perfectly fine. He calls her a few more times, drives by the house for a couple of weeks, but my aunt was having none of it. After a while, he left our lives just as swiftly as he had come. The whole affair lasted only a month, if even that. 3 weeks maybe, and all in all, it wasn't the craziest experience she had with a man. JR was soon forgotten, and we went about our business. Flash forward 2 years later. I'm almost out of middle school. My aunt had moved to a city about 40 miles away. I still lived with my grandparents. They were still strict, but as they had gotten older, so had I. I knew a few ways around the rules. One day, my friend Frank and I missed the bus home from school and called our good school friend Darla to pick us up and take us home after riding a bit. She had this big, beautiful red truck, and I would ride around in the cab of it, loving the freedom and the wind. We were smoking cigarettes and laughing, listening to the radio. The time I would have spent on the bus before my stop was just enough time to hit up the Taco Bell drive-thru. We cruised down the road a bit before heading back to Frank and I's separate houses. He lived just down the road. We had a lot of fun that day. She dropped me off first. My grandparents came outside. They were heavily confused at the sight of an unknown vehicle, and even more so when they saw me get out of it. After letting her be the one to explain because she was older, cooler, and more responsible, they thanked her for being kind enough to take me home. They said how lucky I was that she just happened to be there to help me get there. The things we do to our parents, eh? That was the last time we ever saw my friend. She didn't show up for work for 5 days. I can't speak for everyone, but I assume she had just run away. Darla's parents were going through a nasty divorce at the time. The dad had a hot new girlfriend. The mother was very bitter about it, rightfully so, I guess. It was really embarrassing for all of the kids. Her truck wasn't left behind, so I figured she got tired of her parents acting like infants and just took off. I really missed her, but she was in a whole other league of freedom and coolness. 16 is a whole different life than 14, especially when you're in different schools. I wished her well, maybe even a little bit envious that she'd gotten out of this town and I was still there. I hadn't heard anything for 2 weeks about her, when at 9 o'clock at night my grandparents got a phone call to turn on the news. Darla's body was found in the woods. She had been strangled to death and just left out there. I don't even know for how long. I was devastated. I was so joyful that I had that last experience with her, but saddened and horrified to know what happened. She was so young, barely even older than myself. She was about to be 17 in just a short time. It was a very sad time for our town. The good and bad news is that they caught the guy who had done it very fast. He confessed after some very incriminating evidence, and during his questioning also confessed to killing his girlfriend, who had been missing for about 8 years. Also his father, staging his death to look like a suicide by hanging. When they showed his mugshot on the screen and said his name, I swear I almost passed out. There, clear as day on the screen staring back at me, was a picture of JR. I had no idea he and Darla even knew each other. I can't even imagine what would have happened if we had gone under the bridge that night with him. Investigation Discovery did a piece on it a couple of years back. I was shocked to see it on TV. The memories came rushing back, and I decided to write them all down. I have a newfound appreciation of life now that I'm old enough to understand just how close me and my aunt came to getting killed that night. My aunt lived on to make awesome new memories with me. I have a beautiful life with my husband and 3 boys that most likely wouldn't have happened if things had gone any differently that night.